Okay, people, so we have a new documentary, right? It is called Treasure of the Rice Terraces. And yeah, it is fascinating. It really is, man. And, Cynthia Amsden brought it to me. So always mad props for that. Okay, so yeah, let's look at this. Okay, so right, the doc is written and directed by Kent uh, Donguines. I, I, I think that's how. I mean, I'm probably wrong. Uh, Kent also produces along with Jacob Crawford and Bailey Wood. It is executive produced by Kent. Um, oh gosh, who else do we have? Uh, do, 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 and Lars Krutak. Right, it is associate produced by Grace Palicas and Kalia Kask with Nicole Rufino as the Philippines producer on the piece. Okay, so it is edited by Elad Tazadok. Right, cinematography is handled by John Fleming. We have got Kalisan Kalachalvan and Alexandra Petkovsky on score. In production design is Isabel Baker Smith. Kennedy Wilkie is set decoration. AJ Garces is visual effects, right? And featured in the piece, we have got, Maria Oggay, aka Apo-Whang-Od, right? We've also obviously got Kent, Grace Palicas, Lars Krutak, Kim Atenza, Michelle Marquise D, Mark Bumgana, Celeste Cortezi, Joe Muznagi, Ranol Bayeta, Kurt Bayeta, and then we have the Boscalan community and the Filipino community, featuring coming together. We're seeing locals, villagers, everything in the piece, right? So, what is this about, you may ask? All right, well, here we go. When Filipino-Canadian filmmaker Kent Donguines moved to Canada, he felt his Filipino identity slipping away from him. It prompted an immediate decision to travel back to the country of his birth and rekindle a fading cultural identity. Once there, he discovered that he was not alone in that search. The Philippines hosts a mosaic of arts and practices that, despite centuries of colonization by the Spanish, Americans, and Japanese, have persisted into the modern age. One of the most significant components of his Filipino identity comes from the controversial tradition of tattooing, an art form systematically banned by colonists until Filipinos themselves condemned it. Travelling to the secluded mountain community, Donguines observes the history and symbolism of Kalinga tattoos from its most renowned artist, 108-year-old Apo-Whang-Od, with insight from tattoo historian Lars Krutak and Apu's foremost apprentice, Grace Palicas. This documentary traces the evolution of a sacred tribal practice to an international sensation, covering topics from heritage and hospitality to tourism and tattoo mania. Moreover, it shines a spotlight on Filipino art as a whole, exploring how fields such as design, fashion, tattooing, and cuisine communicate with one another. Donguines delves into the sense of pride and belonging that many Filipinos around the world experience, bringing hope that no matter how far you are from home, your identity and culture are never truly lost. So yeah, that is what this is all about, which is fascinating. We do have a director's statement from Kent, right? It reads, as a first generation Filipino-Canadian, I know I'm not from the indigenous Filipino community in Boscalan, where this documentary is set. However, I've built strong connections in the area and received support from the people there. My journey of understanding identity and belonging allows me to relate to the desire to reconnect with one's roots. In 2016, while in film school, I had a vision of telling the story of Apo-Whang-Od, Oggay, a famous traditional tattoo artist from the Philippines. This project feels especially important now, as many young Filipinos like me need to rediscover traditions lost during over 300 years of colonization. Growing up, I often felt disconnected from my culture, and this documentary is my way of reclaiming that knowledge. In school, I learned about the Spanish, Japanese, and American colonization of the Philippines, and internalized the dominance of Western culture. I saw the world celebrate the discovery of our traditions while I struggled to understand my own. This film is my effort to reclaim my heritage and challenge the exploitation that shaped our culture. The film highlights the rich traditions of the indigenous Filipino community in Boscalan, showing how their culture has evolved through colonization and Western influence. It also captures their resilience in adapting to the tough terrain. Through this film, I hope to reignite Filipino pride and help people reconnect with their identities through tattoos, traditions, or other aspects of our culture. I want to inspire others to embrace their roots and celebrate their heritage, just as I've done through this project. If now is the time to redefine Filipino identity, so be it. So yeah, that's what this is. Now, it's interesting because it starts off with someone talking about this dream, right? I don't know if that's meant to be Kent, right? The dream that Kent had, but we have this and it's subtitled. Right? Then we have Kent talking, and he talks about, being in Canada and feeling embarrassed to announce himself as being, Filipino. which I thought was an interesting thing, right? Because, like, you can understand where that comes from, especially when you're in, an area and no one else that looks like you, maybe, right? And yeah, it just feels weird, and you're looked at and stared at, and you hear people muttering about you, and there's so many things, you know what I mean? But I would be busy. Didn't really go into that aspect of things, right? Why can, the main reasons behind those feelings for Kent, because, this kind of thing is going to be different for everyone, you know what I mean? But he talks about that, and then, the desire to learn about his heritage, right? And the tattooing. Now, also, there's a thing of, because I imagine there is so many different things that go into, like, this heritage, and like the actual area maybe from where Kent's parents are from, right? But so it'd be curious to kind of, because he doesn't really say why tattooing was the one, but it is. So we get to look at that. And I think it's interesting because, it's talked about how, as I said, like the West banned tattooing, right? The colonists banned tattooing. And then the Filipinos themselves looked at tattooing as being, not good. Which, when you've been told something continuously, right, you do then get that in your mind that, yeah, maybe they're right. Yeah, this thing is bad, right? So there is that. But how, it's that perception has changed. And it's I think a big interesting point of that is, I think in so many countries, there was a similar thing, right? Like tattoos being looked at as, oh, only gang members have those, thugs have those, people with no education have those, right? And then over time, when, like famous musicians, actors, athletes, and, just different people have them, then suddenly people like, right? You see your favorite author with one, and you're like, oh, well, maybe, right? And it just changes that perception of what this is. So, it's funny because when you look at so many things, there are those similarities around the world, where they come with food and religion and, things like tattoos. So he travels to Buscalan. And I think that is because of this show, Tattoo Hunter, that Lars Kutak hosted, which I never saw that. I saw a few tattoo shows and programs over the years, but I never came across this Tattoo Hunter one. But yeah, because of that, he's come to this place, and it is the home place of Ugu, right? This famous lady, 108-year-old, which is just, that's crazy, right? 108. And when you watch, she's moving around okay, right? It looks like she's got quality of life. Because sometimes you see people and they're, it's the oldest person in the land, and they're in a chair with tubes all on. They're not moving on their own, and you're just like, oh, that's not quality of life. But Apu, man, You know what I mean? She's doing her thing. And so we get a look into her, right? And I think when you see the fact that she is, she's taken on apprentices, she's training up all of these girls to be tattooists. So this art form, this history isn't lost, which is, I think that's incredible. That's an incredible thing, right? Because sometimes people hoard this knowledge, right? It can only be me. I want to be the one, and because of that, then things get lost. So we have Apu, and then we see Grace, and it is funny because we get archival footage of like when Lars first went to this place, and he got a tattoo, and at that point Grace had just started her apprenticeship. So Apu and Grace give him his tattoo. And so now, all of these years later, she is, a master in the art as well. And so, we get those different sides of it, right? And now there's these other girls involved. And it's funny, I think one of the girls said, because of the show and then just the celebrity that became around Apu, you're seeing all of this tourism. And one girl was just like, I hope that when all of these people are coming for their tattoos, that, it's not just a tattoo. Like they're understanding their history behind it and everything. And they're not. Right? They're not, but I think that's the thing, right? You have those different sides of things, right? Like now this place has become so huge and popular. Now Apu is this recognized tattoo superstar. You're going to attract everyone, like famous people, just ordinary people, tattoo enthusiasts, they're all coming. And a lot of times it's just to have the thing that's in trend, right? Now there's going to be some people who revere it for what it is, but you can't really control that aspect of things. Right? So we're getting all of this, and we're getting some of the history behind the tattoos and the symbolism behind the, some of the creatures that people get tattooed, like the centipede and the eagle, right? And the python and just those kind of things. So we're learning all of this, and we're also going to see how it bleeds into other aspects of things, right? Because we have Mark Bumgar, right, who is a fashion designer, and he designed a dress for Celeste Cortezi, who is Miss Philippines, right? And she was entering, the Miss Universe competition, and so they designed this dress that was inspired by Apu and her tattoos. So it's just like, this thing is just bled out into all of these different aspects of Filipino life and culture, which is, it's fascinating, right? I think it's also interesting, like, I think if you don't know, I think you will look and you just go, oh, that's just a nice dress, right? But for Filipinos, and I guess people that understand tattooing and Filipino traditional tattoos, you're able to see the history, the cultural references in the dress, right? So we're getting all of this, and then we're getting other kind of cultural things like music and dance and food, and just we're getting to see everything, right? How the village has changed, right? What tourism has done, and all of this, and it is this really interesting look at things, right? Kent does say that, I think, from hearing and being around Apu, he's learned to embrace his Filipino heritage and understand what it is to be Filipino, which I think is interesting, right? Because I mean, it's easy to kind of say that when you're around someone, but how embedded are those notions, right? So once you're away from someone, how long before you start feeling those old thoughts? You know what I mean? And it's curious to, like, why there was difficulty understanding what being Filipino was, right, before the trip, you know? Which, again, isn't necessarily explored. But I think just watching Kent's journey throughout this, because it's just 75 minutes, so it's not crazy long. I mean, it is a bit of luck it is 75 minutes, because I didn't know it was subtitled. Cynthia hit me up, and, like, you know, a few things had fallen through, so it's just like, yeah, let's do this one. And you know, I think I opened up the screen and I flicked through to a bit, and there was people talking in English, so I'm like, oh, cool. And then once I actually started it, it's like subs, and the subtitles, it's always the bane of everything, right? Because we've got these little white subtitles with no border behind them. So there is so many times that they get lost in the background of what's going on the screen, which is so frustrating. So yeah, 75 minutes was definitely a good look, because any longer, and yeah, this would have been a bit of a nightmare. I mean, it already was, but it would have just been even worse. But I am glad I watched it, because it's fascinating, and, you know, it's things that I didn't know. As I said, I've seen things about tattooing, but not in the context of the Philippines, right? They've got their way, traditional way of applying the tattoo is very similar to like that of Hawaiian culture, right? So I'd seen that. So it's, you know, again, it's interesting how, right, you have places that aren't necessarily close. And when you think back in the day, right, you're taking a boat, right? And a lot of times it's a little rowboat, right? So to travel, that's a big feat, right? So you weren't just going all over and being like, oh, how do you do? So it's just the fact that you had places and they're using the same techniques, you know what I mean? But yeah, this was, I think, if you're fascinated by tattoos, which, I mean, tattoos are art, right? It's art. And so I think there are those things with art, right? There's different types of art, and some talk to some people, some other forms do not. And I think it's the same with tattoos. You know, some people like the realistic, some people like the cartoon, some people like black and white, some people want the color, some, you know what I mean? It's just people gravitate to different type of things. And so, you know, I think if you're intrigued by all of that stuff, then Treasure of the Rice Terraces, I think you definitely want to check that out. I don't think it matters if you are Filipino or Filipino heritage. I think anyone watching this, there's plenty to learn, right? There's plenty to learn. It's very intriguing. And it's having its world premiere at the Vancouver International Film Festival. So, yeah, if you're in Vancouver on, I think it's the 5th and the 6th, you will be able to check this out. All the details will be on the website, people. So, yeah, people, definitely check out Treasure of the Terraces.